So welcome everyone to my talk about the coat rack. My name is Andre Rogi, and I am very pleased to be with you today to talk about these ways of interacting with ourselves in a methodology that is around self-inquiry. This particular methodology I've developed from the ideas that I've come to with Eastern methodologies and ideas, and really bringing it to a visualization that I find to be very easy for people to grasp. So with the idea of a coat rack, everyone understands what a coat rack is in some way, shape, or form. It's there inside your house as you get inside. You would hang up your clothing as you enter into your home. So think of the visual metaphor of we wear this clothing outside, but on the inside, we don't have that clothing on, right? And so I get to this idea with regards to our authentic self or being home with ourselves, right? And to get us started, I want to just sort of lay the foundation with some definitions, right? So what is authenticity? Now, if you look in the dictionary, authenticity itself literally states it is the quality of being authentic. So I've merged this definition here with the definition of authentic, which is talking about the undisputed origin, not a copy, genuine. Now, is there anything that any of you all think of when it comes to the idea of authenticity? Any kinds of other words? Feel free to pipe in.
Transparency.
Okay. Anyone
Truth.
else?
I think of being real, being real.
Being real. Yeah, I would say the number one sort of noun that ends up coming that sort of wraps this all up is this idea of truth, right? I think I did hear that piped in from people. The other thing we want to also define is identity. So identity has a number of different meanings for people, but according to the Oxford Dictionary, it's the fact of being who or what a person or thing is. So not super explicit or obvious as far as what that could be, but basically when it comes to the idea of identity, we start looking at how things are associated to one another or whether they have meaning to each other. And then that idea of attachment to something. So those are sort of the core concepts when it comes to the idea of identity and how we look at that when we go through this self-inquiry process that I'm going to detail. Now, when we typically create ourself through our identities, we go through via teachings, maybe that we learned from a young child, from our parents, from teachers, etc., or things that end up happening as we go through our life. And then also how we look at things, how we perceive them as they're happening, and then through a methodology of self-inquiry that we do on our own of exploring life and being inquisitive about life. And if you recognize that on a grand scale, we generally are going from more external to internal. And typically our teachings, our learnings are more on the external level than from within. And so we're taking on all of this stuff from the outside rather than developing them so much from the inside. It's really more skewed towards that external way. And so how we generally see each other, I've used the diagram here, the visual of an actual iceberg, right? Everyone kind of understands the idea that there's only the tip of the iceberg that you typically see. And then from below the surface, you have around 90% of the iceberg that is unseen below the surface. So I think of this in sort of three different ways when it comes to how we perceive each other. There's the at a glance, right? The actual superficial level that we see each other. And then right just below the surface is if you happen to have a chat with someone and you discern some things that you talk about through that chat. And then of course, then beyond that is all of the stuff that you don't get to talk about generally, unless you get to know a person really well, or that they don't at all reveal about themselves or don't all really know to reveal about themselves. So there's lots that's below the surface, but what we tend to do when we're in society and we're walking down the street, we perceive people in such a quick manner. In split seconds, we're already determining what this person may grant for us with regards to advantages, whether they're a friend or a foe, all of those sort of animalistic things that we've taken in modern society to be, okay, what do I use this for? Is this useful or not? And how can I move forward, as opposed to really getting to know the person and embracing them as a whole individual. We put them in categories. We have dating websites that allow you to filter down by age, height, and all the different things that really don't make up an actual person or a being. It just is a category. It's an identity that that person has. So now think about when you go and you're meeting someone, say at a networking event, or you've met someone on the street. What are the typical things that you do when you meet the person? So you say hello, and what's the next line of questioning? What's the typical next line that we say?
How are you?
That's a very nice pleasantry. But then with regards to the person themselves, typically we state your name. This is my name. This is who I am. My name is, right? And then what's next after that typically?
What's your name?
Sorry, what was that?
What's your name?
Yep, that would be the automatic response. And after names are exchanged, where do we tend to go from
What
there?
do you do?
Yep, that's one of them. A lot of times we say, oh, I'm from here, or this is where I live, right? That's another one. And then, yes, occupation is also very common. And then if you're, go a little bit further, if you don't just stop at those, oh, this is what I'm about, or I kind of like these things. Oh, I like movies, those kinds of talks. So this is how we kind of summarize ourselves when we meet someone at a networking event or meet someone for the first time. And this is supposed to define us. But if I were to ask each one of you, what someone's name was, and then I ask another one where they're from, and then another person what their occupation is, and then another person their interests and purpose, well, that's not a person. Those are just a bunch of characteristics that are part of a person, right? They aren't an actual person in this particular case, because I'm taking them from all different people. So this doesn't define us, but we use it to define us and say, this is me. This is my identity. This is how you think of me. And that kind of superficial level in which we present ourselves and think of ourselves is how we tend to work with the world in this very fast-paced, modern, dice all the information and sort it out and move forward, rather than, again, getting to really know that person, get to that authentic being, right? So then, now the concept, how do we even see ourselves? Now, I think we'd all agree that a lot of us try to say, oh, yes, I know all about myself. That iceberg is reversed. We've got 90% of that there. It's totally there. That's just all me. But the thing is that we tend to not even look at things such as the assumptions that we make, right? Every day we quickly make judgment calls on something, or we assume we have all of the facts for something. We tend to have underlying biases, whether that's something that's come from childhood, been learned, or has been sort of culturally put there that we don't even realize is there. Same thing with regards to our values. A lot of us don't really even fully understand our value system and how we go through life. And then also our processes have become so rote by a certain point, we don't question them anymore. And we tend to look at things just beyond the process, and we're trying to get to that decision, we're trying to get to that product, we're trying to get to that idea of what we see in front of us, as opposed to how we got there. And then let's not even talk about the skeletons that we don't want to even think about, right, in terms of ourselves. So when I come to this idea of self-inquiry, I want to point out that this particular version of self-inquiry, again, based upon Eastern methodologies, is really a more sort of passive and reflective way of looking at self-inquiry. It's going within and sort of saying, how is this? Who am I? That kind of idea, as opposed to a more active version that I also talk about in some of my works, which is going in and questioning how we make our decisions, questioning our thoughts, being very active, sort of a Western methodology, actively looking at how we're doing things. But this version here, again, going through a visualization method of this coat rack, we have the ideas of temporary versus permanence with this. So you can go through what would be, say, a short visualization process, and you can choose to have it be as temporary or as permanent as you want. The joy of all of this is finding that the questions allow you to examine these things, bring them out, feel what it's like to disrobe some of these identities, and be able to choose whether you want to or not to put that clothing back on when you're finished. Now, the questioning power, too, I want to also talk about. This ability to ask ourselves, take questions rather than the judgment system that tends to be sentences and delineations, right? So the questioning draws out and takes our brain into a process of opening up as opposed to being very defined and closed down. So that ability to question is really allowing us to open up and free ourselves from our identities. And then with regards to the visualization, allowing ourselves to go into a different way of thinking, a different way of perceiving within ourselves, as opposed to everything external, allows us to use that power of taking something that may feel so undefinable, give it a visual image, and allow it to see it go away or be taken off of us, and what that then feels like within the self when you go through that process really gives you that tangible quality that we're looking for when it comes to these identities that are all self-imposed and labeling or attachments or meanings, those things that aren't really tangible, so to speak. Now, there are a number of different categories that I've sort of gone through when it comes to what you can go through for self-inquiry. So we go through the more obvious and the more defined to something more, less defined and more esoteric, right? We go from these kinds of like obvious ones of names and labelings, right? As well as our physical self, whether it's our arm or our heart, or the feeling you have in your body of whether it might be pain or something like that. Same thing along as the lines of the perceived self and the perceived non-self. So what we see in others, what we see for ourselves. So going into that sort of like judgment call way of looking at ourselves. And then also looking further into our experiences themselves. We don't tend to think about those as an identity, but they have shaped the way we look at ourselves. They are things that we attach ourselves and we say, oh, I went and did this training, or, oh, I had, abuse when I was younger. And we take them on as identities, or like, I'm a victim, or I'm a student, or those kinds of things, right? And we attach those experience and learnings as identities within ourselves. And then same again, going towards the loosey-goosey stuff of emotions, things such as anger or sadness, or even things such as joy. So looking at those and how we attach ourselves to those emotions and how we define ourselves with those emotions. And then going all the way to things such as space and time, future with anxiety, past with regret, and then even things such as the present. Like, what is it like to be me without being in time? What is it like to be me if I'm not living in New York City, if I'm not here right now, right? If this body is not here. So you get into sort of the more woo-woo stuff, but by going these levels down, peeling away the onion, you get down to this core authentic self, in my opinion. You get down to the essence of oneself. And I would say that when it feels like you're down to a point, it's also, ironically, you feel expansive, you feel massive, you feel unhinged and unhindered from all of the clothing that has weighed down upon you with regards to these identities. By not having those identities defining your authentic self, you are able to be your full self and expand and be light and be joy and love. So that's where I get to. So some of the sample questions I like to go through, these are some of them on the screen. They're just very easy questions that ply your brain to the idea of what is it like if that identity is not on me right now? If that's not a part of who I am, then who am I? Or just for a moment, right? Again, going with that how temporary you want to make it. What is it like if I set this aside and put this over here? So very simply, again, you take this coat rack methodology, and I'll take you through this in just a couple minutes here. But it's just like if people have done the sleep idea, the visualization of sheep going over the fence, right? People count sheep. It's the same idea. The fence then becomes the coat rack. The sheep are the ideas and the identities. And that motion allows you to move through and move yourself into a space of not sleep, but a space of freedom for yourself. So if anyone has any questions about this methodology, I'm happy to entertain them now. Otherwise, I'm very excited to just take you through a little bit of sampling of what it's like to go through this process for yourself. The beauty of this process is that it really is something you do on your own, and you can go down as many levels as that you feel comfortable for as long as you want in a space of time. You can consider it a meditation. You can consider it a journey for yourself. And what I would like to impress upon you is that it's a place to experiment and play with regards to what that feels like for you when you go through the process. So I'm going to lead you through it, but this is ideally something that you do on your own, and you're able to question within your own head through these things as you kind of go tick down the list of layers as you want to go deeper within yourself to really reveal this true core authentic version of you. So any questions? I will pause.
I just have a comment real quick. As you're saying, take the layers off. I didn't expect that I don't expect that I would feel light and expansive. I expect that I will feel very, very vulnerable. Which to me feels the opposite.
Yeah, I think you'll find that is the sort of logical way of looking at this, right? And that's something that we sometimes look at with regards to vulnerability. But I find that the more that you embrace that vulnerability, the more powerful and expansive you actually feel. I can speak from my own position, at least from that. So the more I embrace that authentic full self that's down within, that seems like it would be so small after you pull away all these identities, it's actually big, it's free, it's full. And that's really more of the feeling that comes from it in the outcome.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Well, if we're ready, if we have everyone's permission, you're more than welcome to take yourself off camera if that helps you at all. But feel free to just kind of get settled in your space And we'll just go through several minutes of just working through this. So real simply, we'll go through a few layers, nothing crazy, but you'll get to see the kinds of things that you can play with regards to this, okay? So take a couple of nice breaths for yourself, get settled in your space really easily. You find yourself in your chair, in your room, listening to my voice, and you start to go within. And maybe you start to see a screen in front of you or some sort of imagery in which you can place a coat rack that you visualize, right? If you have a hard time visualizing that, you can look on the screen now and visualize that coat rack in front of you. And what I'd like to ask you to do then is get to a place where you hear my voice and you are able to identify the things that I bring up and visualize them as some sort of piece of clothing. Think of them as coming off of your body and ask yourself within this questioning to see it come off of your body, and whether you use your hand or you see it floating, seeing it go on that coat rack. And then understand and really feel that feeling that comes from what it feels like for that clothing to no longer be on you. It's over there. It's not on you. Okay, so we'll get started here. So we'll start with some of the more obvious ones. And we'll start with, who am I without being a son or a daughter? What would it be like if I didn't think of myself that way? Again, taking just a moment to sort of see that and feel that within this coat rack visualization. And who am I if I am not a friend to someone? Who am I without my friends and my circle of people that I interact with on a casual or close basis? And what would it be like if for just a moment I think about myself without my occupation? What am I about if I am not what I do for a living or do from day to day? And just for a moment, what is it like if I don't have that part of my body that I don't like, that I have shame about, or I just am always judging? What would it be like if I don't have that as part of my life? And how would it feel if I didn't have that nagging pain from that other part of my body? Who would I be without that? And how would I feel without that emotion that I've been feeling strongly lately? And what does that mean about who I am? Who am I without that feeling, that emotion? And what would it be like if I was not associated with my past? If just for a moment I set aside my past and that was not who I was, if that did not play a part in my life. Similarly, what if I wasn't in the space of thinking about my future? What if that future was not anything that ever entered my imagination or my thought patterns? Who am I without my future? What does it mean to be me without that future? And again, then, what am I like if I'm not in this space right now? If I'm not here sitting in this chair, in the town, village, city that I'm in, what does it mean then to be me? And just for fun, what does it mean to be me without this present moment? Who am I? So I'll allow you to finish doing your visualizations of seeing things go up on that coat rack, examining the feelings within your body, within your sense of self. And take a last few breaths within the space that you're in, within that assessment of self and feeling of self with this process, before we come back together as a group. Just a couple moments and a couple of breaths. So now on your next in-breath, slowly as you feel comfortable, come out of that visualization, back into the room you're in, and back into this space of communication and commiseration with each other. And I invite you to think for a moment as you look at what you're looking at on the screen, seeing what you're seeing with your eyes and hearing what you're hearing, maybe what comes to mind for you with this process, and maybe if you feel comfortable with sharing with some of us, what kinds of things might have come up. You know, sometimes we feel like with some of these identities that we have, we hold them very dear, and it's very difficult for some of them to feel like, well, this doesn't want to go off of my body, this particular item of clothing. And it's very interesting to recognize that and say, well, why would that be? So these are kinds of the things that you can then go into with this process and look at what that might mean for yourself, whether it's talking with a friend or a professional about these kinds of ideas as to why something might be difficult or why something was super easy. So does anyone want to share a little bit with regards to the experience? And I know we kind of zoomed through, but I wanted to give you a little taste of what it could be like. And I'd be very happy to discuss with everyone.